The Burrows of Berea is a conversational podcast.
We study the Bible and we talk about it.
Not all of us are of the same faith.
And one of us doesn't have a faith.
But we still love one another, and we're going to continue to talk about these things.
The things we believe in and the things we believe about what we read in the Bible. Not all of these are necessarily true. Some of it is opinion and speculation. Thank you for
listening and speculating with us.
There you go. That was good. Yes.
You are listening to the Burrows of Berea.
Well, welcome back to the Burrows of Berea. I'm Rick Welch, and to my left is Sarita the Edge Edgerton.
I'm all the eye candy you'll need today.
I was thinking that, like a Charleston Chew, old and nobody wants it anymore.
That's exactly right.
I'm not talking about you. I was talking about myself.
That's exactly right.
What's that make me, a Clark bar?
Because I'm about to be 50.
Fitty.
I'm about to be 50 next month.
Oh my gosh, we need to have a birthday party for
I know. I looked in the mirror this morning. I think I'm more like a big hunk.
Behind the glass.
Chunky Chew.
Rocket Man, Andy Bishop. Straight out of Compton, Ralph Hicks.
Represent.
And Cherry the Annihilator Lewis.
Hello.
No music, no nothing, just straight up. She's the Annihilator today. Well, so I'm excited about tonight. Our guest, I spoke with him. Well, I actually just tonight for the first time I spoke with him, but it was via email. In the past, I was introduced to him via Bobby Crookshank. You know, Mr. Bob Crookshank. He has a lot of contacts, and he, through his contacts, he introduced him. So our guest tonight is Dr. Craig Olson. He has taught the Bible for over 3 decades in New Zealand, Asia, and the USA. He currently teaches at Trinity Southwest University and Veritas International University. He received his PhD from Dallas Theological Seminary and has published articles on Biblical Archaeology, the long lifespans in Genesis, and the Patriarchal Chronology. And he's also the author of the book, How Old Was Father Abraham? The Genesis Lifespans and Light of Archaeology. Dr. Craig Olson, thanks for being on the Burrows of Berea.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you, guys. I'm very excited to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about myself and, of course, talk a bit about the book.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I've read the book, and it was actually, I'd never really heard this position before, so it was very unique. We're going to get into it. I know I come from a young earth creation background, and so I'm sure we'll be going back and forth on that. But before that, normally with the testimony episode, I always ask our guests this question. And if you've never listened to this, it'll be somewhat surprising for you, but perhaps you can give us an answer. To the best of your ability, can you tell me your earliest memory of when you heard the name Jesus Christ?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was young. I grew up going to Sunday school in New Zealand in a Brethren church. You call it Plymouth Brethren over here. And so my parents actually were not churchgoers. They believed in God. They believed they were Christians, but they sent myself and my sister and my brother off to Sunday school. And so we got to hear the gospel at a young age and learn about the scriptures. And so I, grew up learning the Bible, memorizing scripture and that kind of thing. And I thought when I was younger, I always thought that I was a Christian because all my friends were Christians, and I went to church. So I did the same things that they did. I got into trouble like they did, and went to the different same church meetings they did. And it wasn't until I was 16 years old that the gospel became something real to me, and I realized, well, wait a minute, I am actually a sinner, and just going to church and doing these activities is not what it takes to be saved. And
how old were you, did you say?
I was 16.
Oh, 16.
And 16 years old. And I was at an Easter camp that we had in New Zealand, and getting to hear the Bible, and nothing that I heard was new, but it just hit me that I realized that I was a sinner, and I needed to be forgiven for my sins, and I needed to let Christ be guiding my life. And so they had an altar call, and I went forward and talked to the minister and all of that, and so that was kind of where it all started for me.
Wow. So So take us from there. So at the age of 16, you've been raised in church, so you've been around the gospel, you've been around church, Sunday school, all of it, and then you have this, this is a radical change at the age of 16. And then, so tell us, sort of take us on that journey, of your life. Obviously, you're a very well studied man.
I'm so sorry, where did you grow up?
I grew up in New Zealand, the most beautiful country in the world.
Yeah.
The land of the hobbits.
Yeah, it is beautiful.
The land of the hobbits, exactly.
It's on my bucket list. I want to go. I really do.
So my second real pastor that I ever studied under or sat under after I became a Christian as an adult was from New Zealand. His grandfather founded the New Zealand Communist Party.
Oh, really?
Yes, and he went to a revival held by Major Thomas and to speak out against him. So Major Thomas charged him with proving the Bible false. He went home that night to try to do that and ended up accepting Christ on his knees in his dorm room in the middle of the night and became a missionary to the States.
Fantastic. That's great.
Yeah.
And so I knew you sounded familiar. Yeah, I love to hear stories about New Zealanders. There's not too many of us around, but we do make an impact, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, so tell us, so from the age of 16 to becoming, to earning a doctorate, take us on that journey. I'm really curious.
All right, yeah, absolutely. So in high school, I didn't really grow very much in my faith, but then when I went to university, in Auckland University, I got in touch. I found a group called Campus Crusade for Christ. And they were doing something that I'd always heard about and never had done before. This was called evangelism. And I was like, well, I thought we were supposed to do that. So, let me get involved. And so we would meet together and do discipleship, and then we would talk to other students about our faith. And as a young student, I was terrified, but I really grew through the discipleship that they offered. That not only a Bible study meeting, but then meeting one-on-one with my discipler, and then getting to talk to other people about our faith and kind of growing. So that when I finished and graduated from college, I had a choice. Well, not really a choice. I applied for lots of different jobs. I graduated engineering, was my undergraduate degree, and I didn't get any jobs at all. And then I thought, on the off chance, let me just apply for Campus Crusade for Christ staff.
What sort of engineering?
I didn't really. Chemical engineering.
Oh, wow, that's intense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
so,
I'm just curious.
No. But my life took a turn because I got accepted with Campus Crusade for Christ. And I thought, you know what? I'm young. I'm single. Let me do this Christian thing for a couple of years, and then I'll get an engineering job. And it turned out a little different from that. So it's turned out I was with Campus Crusade for over 30 years and did campus ministry in New Zealand, and then came over here. After 10 years of doing campus ministry, I was married. I had a kid. My wife is from the States. And so we ended up coming over here to do 2-year study for a master's degree. And that ended up turning into be a little bit longer than 2 years. And so I enjoyed studying at Dallas Theological Seminary. And while I was studying there, I was working with a ministry with a guy by the name of Josh McDowell Ministry. You may have heard of him.
Yes, he's one of my heroes.
So I got to be involved in translating Josh's books in Asia. And so for a little more than a decade, I would travel to Asia and meet with ministry leaders and Christian publishers and sit down with them, just ask them the question, what do you need? How can we resource you? And so based on what they wanted, we were able to get books translated in about 12 different Asian countries, about 25 different books.
Wow.
Resulting in, while I was there, about 500,000 books or more being sold, printed, or distributed for free. in different countries. So I really enjoyed that.
That's amazing.
And so after that, I really had a desire to teach the Bible more. So we came back. We went to Dallas Seminary some more, and we moved our family to the country of Singapore, and taught at a seminary in Singapore. Actually, a couple different seminaries in Singapore for a couple of years, and just loved that.
I love Singapore. I've been there. It's a beautiful country.
Yeah, very beautiful. Very expensive.
Yes.
To live there.
Do not chew gum there.
No,
Do not chew. It's true. And when you get into Changi Airport, it's really strict there.
Oh yeah.
You can't chew gum?
You cannot chew gum.
Mm-mm.
Nope. And if
That's
you are
against
caught,
the law.
what you would consider a
Against the law.
misdemeanor charge with like drugs here is like punishable by death. Singapore
Right.
are very strict.
Yeah,
about that.
you remember there was, I think it was 10, 20 years, it was a while ago. There was a couple news stories about Americans,
Getting lashes.
getting caned and
Yes,
stuff.
Yeah.
Was that
caned. Yeah, they got
Singapore?
caned. Yeah.
It was Michael somebody. He got caned. I can't remember his last name.
Michael
But-
caned.
No, but he got but he got caned. He got so many lashes, and it's a very painful thing, But anyway, sorry about that. I assume you didn't get caned while you were in Singapore.
I hope
We
not.
did not. I did not. No.
He probably would have different views about the country.
Yeah, but it is English speaking Singapore.
Right.
Mhm.
And so I got to teach in English, and I got to teach students from about 10 or 15 different countries. And so the great thing was that here I am equipping these this next generation, and they're going to go back to their own country, or some of them are going to go cross-culturally to other countries and go places that I couldn't go. And so take the gospel even further and be able to teach and equip, the next generation of leaders in the church. So I really enjoyed that.
That's amazing. So, this kid that grows up in New Zealand ends up, coming to the States, Dallas Theological Seminary. I mean, that's, for us here in in our country, that's a major institution that pumps out a lot of preachers and evangelists and missionaries all over the world. So, that's
The
that's
guy
incredible.
who married me was a DTS. He's now a pastor in Austin at a real big church.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right.
Who do you remember? Who was the president whenever you were there?
Well, when I got here, Chuck Swindoll was the president.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was great. That was really good. I mean, he's such a great communicator.
I'm going to have you pause just for one moment. Dr. Olson, one of our cast members just came in.
Hey, Ricky Rich. The exterminator.
Mr. Carter.
Welcome back,
Oh, yeah.
Carter.
I apparently set that microphone for a midget.
Well, look,
I'm very short when I sit down.
Well, you got it right.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. You're trying to do the DEI.
I just thought maybe he'd want to lay on the ground. I don't know. Giving him options.
Well, Big Daddy Carter just walked in the studio. He was sorry about that. We had to interrupt there for a second there. So,
Sorry, Mr. Craig.
yeah, Doctor
Doctor.
Craig,
You concur,
Dr. Olson. So Chuck Swindoll was the president at Dallas Theological Seminary when you came there the first time.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, but I ended up studying a long time after we were in Singapore. We came back here, and that's when I started the PhD. And they told me it would take 5 to 6 years, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to do it in 4. And it took me 7. So
All right.
That's compromise. That's the nature of compromise.
Yeah.
They
I know
said
a lot of
5,
people
6,
that
I said 4, so we did 7.
I know a lot of people that
Yeah,
squeezed
there
a
you go.
4-year bachelor's degree into 7.
Well, that's how they got Methuselah's age.
there you go.
Right.
Exactly. And so once I got into the PhD, my interest shifted. I got to go on a tour of Israel. And while we were there, they were talking about a site across in the country of Jordan, the site of Sodom. And I was like, wait a minute, I've heard about a different site for Sodom. So I ended up doing some research on the 2 major different sites for Sodom, and changed everything with my dissertation, and ended up doing my dissertation on the lifespans in Genesis and how that relates to chronology, and especially how that relates to archaeology. of the biblical sites, and so that's what led to the book coming out.
This has been an interest of yours for a long time.
Yeah, several years. So during the dissertation, I was always interested in this, and then I got to dig at an archaeological site that we believe is Sodom. Went there first in 2015 and then again in 2018. And so I got to get down on my hands and knees in the dirt and dig up artifacts from the time of Abraham, which you wouldn't think that's exciting. You know, I tell people, hey, you can raise your own funds, pay your own way, and
ask a lot of government's permission, and they will either say no or just make sure that you don't get to leave with anything because it's not yours.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then crawl in the dirt.
Yeah.
You crawl in the dirt all day on your hands and knees, and but you know what? It's so exciting because you're in this square, and there's maybe 10 of you there, and it's kind of like fishing because you don't know what you're going to find, and somebody in your group will find something. And you'll all gather around. You're like, what is that? This is so exciting. This is something that hasn't seen the light of day for thousands of years. And you want to know what it is. And you kind of get to imagine a little bit what the lifestyle was like, back during biblical times. So it's very exciting.
What did you find on that dig? What kind of stuff do you find on a dig at a site that's that old? Like what sort of stuff comes up kind of generally?
A lot of pottery. So every day you're finding pottery, thousands and thousands of sherds of pottery. And so, they call it the Bronze Age or the Iron Age or something like that. But that's not the majority of what was used. The iron was the leading edge of technology at the time. So we call it the Iron Age, but pretty much what everybody used all the time, every day, was pottery.
was really hard dirt.
Yeah, exactly. Been used for thousands and thousands of years. And so from the pottery, then you're trying to diagnose different parts, either a base of a jug or a rim or a handle, and that helps tell you what time frame it's from. And then
just by design, kind of?
Yes.
By shape.
Yes.
Yeah.
By shape. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the shapes change over time. And so the way it happened, ancient cities always pretty much built on the same place because in real estate, it's location, location, location.
It always has been from the beginning of time.
All throughout all of human history. And so if you've got a site that is up high, so where you can see your enemies coming, it has arable land nearby that you can grow your crops. It has a source of water that you need. And if you have a site that has those things, and usually a road or a trade route nearby, if you've got a site that has those elements, people stay there. And so when one generation either gets wiped out by an enemy or something, the next generation to come along just builds right on top.
So you ever just find something and you're like, this is only 500 years old. And you just throw it and keep digging.
Yeah, like a Mountain Dew bottle.
The 500-year-old Mountain Dew bottle. This is the very first Mountain Dew bottle. Sorry.
Yeah.
Did it have a code underneath the cap?
Yeah.
Are you tired of compromising when it comes to protecting your valuable firearms? Then let us tell you about Carolina Cases, your ultimate destination for hard plastic, impact-proof pistol cases. Carolina Cases are TSA approved and are crafted with high-quality foam, ensuring maximum protection for your firearm during transport or storage. At Carolina Cases, they understand the importance of safeguarding your investments. Carolina Cases provide unparalleled durability, keeping your pistols safe from impact and damage. So hop on over to www.carolinacases.net to explore their wide range of pistol cases designed to meet your specific needs. Don't settle for less. With Carolina Cases, you can ensure your firearms are safely stored, preserve your peace of mind, and protect what matters most. Enter code BURROWS at checkout to receive free shipping.
Well, I was curious. The thing that is sticking out to me, of course, is everybody knows what happened to Sodom, correct? You know what happened to Sodom, Andy?
Wasn't it destroyed in a war?
By fire.
Oh, fire.
By fire and brimstone from
Fire
heaven.
and brimstone.
So, Dr. Olson, I'm just curious, in your dig or in other digs, can you tell me if there were any signs of that type of fiery destruction in a specific time period?
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why we think this is Sodom. In fact, there was a paper published last year in a scientific journal based on the research from our site. Apparently, to date, it's like the most downloaded paper from the scientific journal called Nature.
Oh, yeah.
I actually read that.
Yeah, Nature's not exactly a small journal either.
Yeah,
it's a pretty prevalent one.
No, that's right. And so it analyzed the, absolutely. This site was completely wiped out by, it looks like what we're calling an airburst, similar to what happened in 1908 in Tunguska, Russia, where a meteorite comes down into the atmosphere and explodes before reaching Earth and just causes massive destruction. And so not only this site, but all of the sites in that region were wiped out and completely destroyed. And so our site has this level of ash, meter thick, all the way across the site, and it's completely churned up. In some cases, very few human bones, but there are human bones in there. But even the architecture and the rocks is just churned up in this because it was just in a massive.
So it's like almost bombed.
Right, exactly.
It was by God.
Yeah, I mean that's
by God.
And when you look at it, from the biblical standpoint, they're just. Mm-hmm. Oh wow! So Cherry just pulled up a picture of that Tunguska, Russia, and that was pretty wow. But so being there yourself, and also from these scientific journals, that there is a layer, like you said, a meter thick of ash. Mm-hmm. So something happened there, whether you want to agree that it's God or not. Something catastrophic happened in the city of Sodom and decimated it.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's what we say is, whatever your theological background, you can't argue that this site was the largest city in the southern Levant. It was like 10 times the size of Jericho, 5 times bigger than Jerusalem at the time, very wealthy, very influential, and that something happened, some cosmic event that happened that wiped it out completely, and all the satellite towns, and in fact poisoned the soil, so nothing could grow there, and nobody lived there for over 700 years.
That was a question I was curious about. How long before? Yeah, that's a long time. How many people do you have any idea? I guess I better say that. How many people might have been there at the time of this event?
I don't know. That's a good question. That's a good question. Our site has, it's like 60-something acres within the city wall. It's very, very large. And and people lived, the houses that you find, people live on top of each other, right close to each other. And so there would have been a lot of people in that. And it fits everything in the scripture in terms of the location, from where Lot and Abraham looked over from where they were standing between Bethel and Ai and looked to the east. It fits right there. It's in this circular plain just north of the Dead Sea. In Genesis 13, wherein it says Lot looked over to they call it the cities of the plain. The word is not actually plain. In fact, it's not a geographical word at all. It's the word Hebrew word kikar, and it means a circle. So this, if you look on any satellite map or Bible map, you see this circle of a plain just north of the Dead Sea called the Kikar of the Jordan, it's the plain of the Jordan. The site, which today is called Tel El Hammam, was right there on that plain. And so it's in the right location. It's got the right stuff. It tells the right story. The biggest issue that people have with the site being Sodom is the chronology, because the destruction can be dated to 1700 BC, plus or minus 50 years. So that's the issue that I started to tackle, because the traditional chronology that we as evangelicals grow up with, is that Abraham was born in 2166 BC, and he lived 175 years, and you added all that up, and that doesn't fit.
Yeah, he wouldn't be near Sodom. Technically, if this chronology, the scientific chronology is correct, then there's no way Abraham could have been there, is what you're saying, based on the biblical.
Right. And so then I started to look at, well, wait a minute, what about other sites? And it turns out that if you stick to the traditional evangelical chronology, it's kind of based on Ussher's chronology, although no one sticks to Ussher's dates anymore. And if you have Abraham living around 2100 or 2000 BC, not only is this site not destroyed during that time, but none of the sites in the biblical story are there. There's no Jerusalem. All of the sites that Abraham visits in his travels are not there. Hebron is not there. Dothan, Shechem is not there. All of the ones aren't. And so I started to say, wait a minute, maybe our interpretation of these biblical ages and how we come up with a chronology, maybe we need to relook at that interpretation.
Now, by saying it that way, by relooking at your interpretation, would you say that would be a break from what even Dallas Theological Seminary would teach in regard to this?
Well, it's interesting. During my dissertation, I had a professor. In fact, I've had a couple different professors who've told me that I've convinced them. My dissertation and my book have convinced them. Professors from Dallas Seminary, and others that I've talked to that no, I definitely have not convinced them. And of course, who I'm arguing against was one of my professors, Dr. Eugene Merrill.
Right, you mentioned him in your book.
Yeah, yeah. And he's a very learned scholar, wonderful man. And he's kind of my example, because we talked about this many times. He's one who will, argue with academic rigor, but yet he has this gracious Christian attitude about him and how he deals with you as a person. And so I'm like, that I want to be that. I want that to be my example, that, hey, we can talk about stuff and we can disagree, and let's look and try and figure out what the Bible says and what it means.
Yeah, we love that here. We're the same way here at the Burroughs. We that Christian attitude, we think that's paramount. You have a difference of opinion, but that does not mean you have to destroy one another.
Not so much with the academic rigor, but we do our best.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Good point, Andy.
Yeah, and so Dr. Merrill published an article years ago and has written about it, and has kind of become the de facto chronology of the patriarchal time, based on the traditional evangelical understanding, which is that these lifespans are face value numbers. They mean exactly what they say. Abraham did live 175 years, and Isaac lived 180, and Jacob 147, and Joseph 110, and that we can use that to form a chronology. We know we have synchronisms further up in history, closer in history. Once you get to the time of the kings of Israel and Judah, we can match those dates with secular and other sources from the ancient Near East. And so we know those dates pretty firmly, back to maybe King Solomon or King David. And then we really don't have anything further back from that. And so the traditional method has been, for hundreds of years, for a couple thousand years, has been to take these numbers at face value and add them all up and go back to when you think Abraham lived. And the problem with that is, like I say, not only it just doesn't fit the chronology. The cities that Abraham's supposed to visit just aren't there.
I noticed, so in your book, you talk about the literal view and how that in reality, what we're calling the literal view is not actually taken literally.
Yes, exactly. And so I'm very careful to use the word literal, and I don't use it very much in the book.
You use the word authentic. I saw like authentic.
Yes, exactly. And so, and if I'm speaking, I try and explain what I mean by that, because the literal view, as I understand it, is what did the author intend to communicate? So we're trying to dig into the author's intent, and that's very difficult. Obviously, we're separated by thousands of years, a different culture, a different language, a different location. So, but we're trying to find out. So the literal view would be, what did the author actually mean by what they said when they wrote that down? And so that takes into account the culture of the time and, the different language. And, we understand this pretty clearly when it comes to words. And quite often, we study the Greek or we study the Hebrew, and we go back to saying, well, this word may have meant something different than that culture. And that people don't have a problem with that. And, you hear your pastor on a Sunday saying, well, the Greek word means this and doesn't mean that, or whatever. Where people have a problem is with numbers, because you and I we were all brought up that numbers is the one thing that doesn't change.
A number feels like a number.
That's right. Yeah, it's like 1,000 is 1,000. It's
Exactly.
that simple.
Mm-hmm.
But love, like the word love, it's not always love in English, right? It is love, but there's all kinds of different meanings of it. But 1,000 is 1,000.
Exactly. And so we were taught that, growing up, mathematics is the universal language. Like 2 + 2 is 4 in every language, every country, even out in the universe. It's always the same. That's something that's universal. And so here I am trying to say, wait a minute, maybe this ancient culture used numbers when they talked about the lifespans or the ages of their ancestors in a different way than we do today. Because if I tell somebody my age, in our culture, accuracy is paramount. You think, if I say my age, you think it's exactly that.
That's fascinating. I never would have come at it from that angle. I never would have seen that coming.
Mm-hmm.
Just the idea that they're not necessarily being literal time-wise with age.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Well,
It's a story. It's a part of the story about the person.
One of the things I like
Exactly.
about what you say in the book and how you do this is what was done in that time. And a lot of times we forget that, most people in this country are educated, but most people then were not. Nor
Right.
did they read or write, or they did some counting so that they could buy things, but it was elementary. So how did they? What language were they using? To whom were they speaking? And in what context were they doing these things? And how did they make people understand in a way that, for their level of education, they could understand it?
Right, exactly. And what were they trying to communicate? And so one of the things that I did was I looked back at all of the other genealogies and king lists from ancient time. And what I found is that the common, or the most common format, was that everybody exaggerated or used these extremely large numbers when talking about their ancient ancestors. And we think that was a way to give them honor.
The age gives them import.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, now we don't
And-
like anything to have age
I
except
know.
our cars and some of our house decorations, but we want to do anything we can not to age at all.
Unless we have a really expensive antique, yeah. Like you said, the car or a good antique, yeah.
Right.
So, wild ignorance on my part. Are we still like in the same numerical system at that point and place?
A great question, actually, because the first numbering system was a base 60 system. Not
Oh, wow.
Base 10.
Another thing I did not see coming.
It's in the book.
They had 60 fingers, so it only made sense
Yeah.
at the time.
Exactly. And it's called sexagesimal system. And so that's the base 60 system. And actually, we still use it today. It's one of the best systems because we have 60 degrees in a circle. We have 60 minutes in an hour, 60 seconds in a minute, and our latitude and longitude. And this was so good because 60 is the first number that's divisible by 1 through 10 and 12 and 15 and 20 and 30. And so it's easy to divide things. In fact, we do it without even thinking. If you run a marathon or you say a time, we automatically convert that to base 60. And it wasn't until in the Mesopotamian culture, and then later on, the Egyptian culture used a base 10 system. And so it's fascinating to go back and look at this because actually some of the early king lists, the one that I refer to the most, the Sumerian king list, their list of their ancient kings, it's not a lifespan, it's the length of their reign, but all of them are divisible by either 60 or 60 times 60. And so it's clear that these are symbolic numbers that we think are there to give them, honor to these people who were real people who lived a long time before records were written down. And this was a way to record something about them that gave them honor.
Did a lot of your study based on mouth to mouth transcriptions where people did oral histories? Because that happened, I think, till around 300 BC. Mostly was, if I got that right, it mostly was oral translations.
Yeah, and that's true. We did. There was oral transmission of different genealogies, and so this, we can study modern some tribes today. We can't study ancient cultures because if it was oral, we don't have it. It's not written down, and so that's why pretty much any list in the Bible and out of the Bible is limited to about 10 people. And so you have 10 people in Genesis 5, you have 10 people in Genesis 11. And because in terms of memorizing and remembering something, 10 is about the limit.
Well, that might be the limit today, but I've heard of studies, one recently, that back hundreds and thousands of years ago, people's memory was a lot greater than what ours is today because that's what they had to rely on. So where it may be 10 today, it was probably 100 or more, several hundred years ago, and maybe 500 or more, 1,000 years ago, because that's what they had to go by. So they grew up.
Ralph's theory of we're all getting really stupid.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Internet. Wow, so that's fascinating to me. So just you found this in other cultures, in the Mesopotamian region, and by using what you saw with these other cultures, obviously the influence that could have come upon the Hebraic people was tantamount in your study, and so then you began to see these differences within the patriarchs, and were able, in your opinion, to land them in the correct chronology to match actual biblical archaeology.
Right. So yeah, if you use the traditional chronology and Abraham's living 2100 or 2000 BC, that's what we call the intermediate Bronze Age. And like I say, the cities that he visits are not there. But if you realize that these numbers in Scripture, these lifespans, were never meant to create a chronology. In fact, nobody created a chronology until almost the time of Christ. No culture anywhere. It started with the Greeks, the earliest 300 BC. And so even if they wrote down lifespans, which we see in the Bible, nobody thought that they would use those to create a chronology. They didn't have an objective system for the year that they were in, or the decade, or the century, or the era. We talk about a decade like the 80s, or we talk about an era like the Bronze Age or something. They didn't do that. They just had a basically the fourth year of such and such king, but it wasn't tied to an objective system. It was just tied to that king. So they didn't think about the idea. There's no evidence that people thought about putting things in a chronology. And when you realize these numbers were not meant to create a chronology, they were meant for a different purpose, to communicate something different, you're free to put Abraham where he fits, and the cities and even the cultural practices fit much, much better in what we call the Middle Bronze II age, from about 1800 BC to about 1550 BC. And it turns out that
if the patriarchs are living during that time, they can do all of the things that happen in the Bible. They can travel. They have long distance marriages. The price of slaves fits. Jerusalem is there, so you can have Melchizedek. All of the things start to fall into place. And so it just makes a lot more sense to do that. But it's kind of difficult for us to accept that, well, wait a minute, these numbers may mean something different than we assume when we take a look at them from our modern point of view.
Well, especially when I'm sorry, Ralph, go ahead.
How hard was the translation based on, like you were saying, and what I've looked at, things they didn't start putting it down until about 300 years before BC. How did you find the translation from the different languages? Because you have people writing down what is oral history in their culture in different languages, and then you have 2 or 3 languages there. And then how hard did you find that information and then to translate it, but not only translate it, figure out from what culture it came and what changes were made based on that person's interpretation who came from a different land?
Yeah, no, a lot of that's already published. When I'm looking at the Sumerian king list or Akkadian or the Hittites, that's already published in textbooks and dusty tomes that I can find in the library. And that's what a PhD is sitting in a library, poring over these textbooks and growing cobwebs. All of that's already translated and published. And so in my dissertation, I had to refer to some original language texts. What I tried to do in the book is not do that, just deal with English and just quote English so that people can go find the resources themselves. A lot of it actually is online. You can find the Sumerian king list online and learn a lot about that. It's not only transliterated, but it's translated. And so you can find that online and do as much detailed diving in as you want to.
So a question that I have for you is this. When do you believe that the book of Genesis was written?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so I still believe that Moses wrote the book of Genesis, in fact, the Pentateuch, after the Exodus on the plains of Moab, before entering the promised land. Now, not every evangelical will hold that, but I do. I think there was one author. Now, obviously, he was using prior sources, right?
Right.
So Abraham lived a long time before Moses, and then you're going even further to Noah and floods and creation, all of that, right? So I believe that some of the sources that he used were written. There may have been oral transmission. Absolutely. We have no way of knowing one way or other if it's oral because we have nothing. And in fact, we don't have any of the written sources that he would have used. All we have is the text of the scripture.
So you think that because Moses would have compiled this, then that there's a possibility he's using other sources, but it could have been considered like not really multiple authors, but he could have inserted something from a previous author into his book.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So
like Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, those big arguments, is it quite possible that Genesis 1 could have been inserted after the fact? Do you see where I'm going with that? Like, I'm just saying, if he compiled it, was that a written treaty that was separate from his writings that was entered into later? I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I'm just asking you if that's a possibility.
It's a possibility. So I'm definitely not on the JEDP, documentary hypothesis train. I don't think that at all.
Okay.
Well, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. Actually, when you look at the book of Genesis, it's arranged around 10 genealogies. What the word in Hebrew was toledot. And so it's arranged around these 10 toledot. It's that word is repeated 10 times. And so it seems like, it gives to, here's the genealogy, or this is what happened to Terah, for example. And then it goes on from Terah, Abraham, and Isaac, and and then it goes to, this is the toledot of so-and-so.
Right.
And so it seems to me that's a much better way to understand how Genesis was composed, is that it was arranged around these 10 genealogies. And I believe that, they would have used a clay tablet with probably cuneiform or some sort of writing on there, and it makes much more sense to me that a clay tablet may have had a list of names with something about that person on there, and that then Moses used those as the backbone, and then filled in the narrative around that.
Now, what would be? When do you believe that Moses lived? Like what time in chronology? Like in our time?
And so I'm going for a late date of the Exodus. So that's the 13th century, maybe around 1250 BC. Some people go with an early date around 1400, or the traditionalists say 1446 was the date of the Exodus. There's two major camps, the early Exodus, the late Exodus. I'm going with the late one, but I don't mind. You can go with the early one.
Well, how does that fit based on what you say in regard to the Exodus? If Abraham, like when God tells Abraham that his people are going to be in bondage for 400 years, does that 400 years fit to get to Moses, or is that another one of those numbers that bounce around?
Right. So I think a lot of the numbers, including the 400 years, are symbolic numbers, or in some cases rounded numbers.
Gotcha.
So,
we're not taking it literal, authentic. We're just those numbers are going to be used that way throughout the book of Genesis. The author is going to. It's going to be used the same way all the way through the whole book. Okay, that makes sense.
I think a lot of times we assume chronology is set the way things are laid out, and it's not necessarily to happen that way. I would take, for example, everyone thinks that the Declaration of Independence was signed at the same time because the picture shows everyone there, but that was several months that people kept coming and going to sign it. And I think a chronology is we don't know exactly when it was all put together. They finally put together a book after Jesus, but all of these other books came together at different times by different people.
Yeah. Exactly. And so we have limited evidence, and archaeology hopefully will dig up more stuff and we'll find more information. But we're going off the evidence we have to try and piece together. And the exciting thing about archaeology is it helps us see things a little differently. And a lot of our interpretations of Scripture have changed. And it's not that Scripture was wrong, but that perhaps our interpretation was incorrect. And so that's the exciting thing, I think. The Bible text is the text. It's been studied. It's the most studied book in history. It's the most debated book in history. And, it's the most read book in history. But sometimes archaeology is helping us discover things. And in some cases, I think, rediscover the original wording or the original meaning of the biblical text.
This episode is brought to you by Carolina Cases. Whether in your home, auto, suitcase, or hotel room, you can be assured that with Carolina Cases, you can protect what matters most. Carolina Cases are TSA approved, so you know your items are secured in a shock and impact-proof hard case. These lightweight, durable cases come with pre-cut, protective, high-quality foam to fit your pistols by make and model, compact size or full size. They also come in a universal configuration for multiple options. Carolina cases are more than a pistol case. They are available in fully customizable foam to protect what matters. You can go to their website at www.carolinacases.net to see their designer protective lid designs. Each is laser engraved to give you unmatched style at home or on the range. So protect what matters most. Visit www.carolinacases.net. That's www.carolinacases.net. Enter code BURROWS at checkout to receive free shipping. That's right. Just enter the code BURROWS at checkout and you will receive free shipping. That's BURROS.
I like that you did this study and you talked about language and archaeology together. But did you find a predominant language when you were doing this that this all goes back to, or were there several languages, and did those other languages, the timing of those other languages, affect how this was interpreted by the people in those times? And could that be some of the reasons for how we understand the timing of things?
Yeah, that's a good point. And the text of the scripture, when it comes to numbers, is very clear. There's no textual problems. And in Genesis, in fact, throughout the Old Testament, the numbers are written out as words. It's written as 175 years, Abraham's lifespan. It doesn't have the symbol 175.
Yeah. I think didn't you write that 170 and 5, something
Yes.
like that? Yeah. I thought that was interesting. I'd never heard that before.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
when you look at the way they write out the Greek numerology, you can see it, but I hadn't thought of that in relationship to this before.
Yeah, but the script that we have, our Old Testament, is the square. They call it the square Aramaic based script, a Hebrew script. Is actually a different script than what Moses would have written, if indeed he did, write the Pentateuch during the late Bronze Age. The script that we have is more from the time of Solomon, and so there's kind of already a translation there. Now we don't have anything other than what we have. We only have the script, and so that's what we're going from, and that's what we're. But no, Moses would have used a different script based on the Phoenician alphabet. It's still Hebrew, but it would have looked different. And so you're having people copying and translating the scripture even way back then. Now, we believe that God kept it and God preserved His scripture through time. But there's an issue there of translation and the different script.
So obviously your view does not match the view of the young earth creation movement, correct? So
Right.
have you been met with opposition, like strong opposition against your work?
No, not really. Not so much.
Are you ready? No, I'm just kidding.
I found Answers in Genesis. He took you to task pretty good.
Who was this?
You did?
Yeah. I sent y'all the link.
Oh, yeah, I read that.
Oh, we need to send the link to you,
Oh,
Dr.
send it
Olson.
to me.
Somebody took
Send
you to
it to me.
task, sir.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's great.
they actually cited your book and everything.
Oh, fantastic.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you did send us that, Sarita.
Yeah.
What I'll
Yeah.
do, Dr. Olson, is I'll
Fantastic.
email that to you, and then you can get
Awesome.
into a proper fist fight with these people. But all
He
jokes
can't
aside,
wait. I can tell. He's like, please.
Hey, let's have a debate.
Yeah.
Come out here and we'll film it.
Jeez. Well, I think that obviously, from my perspective, where I was raised in Western North Carolina, here in the Southern United States, young Earth creation is a predominant view. But then again, so are a lot of other views that, as I've become, more and more studied, I found that aren't they're traditional, but aren't necessarily correct or perfect, which is fine. So having a different view of it, in your opinion, when science says the universe is how old? 13.8 billion years? Or is that how old the Earth is? Which one is the Earth? 4 point something? I can't remember.
Yeah, Earth is 4.5 billion.
4.5 billion years. So what is your opinion? Is the Earth, do you agree with science, or do you believe, because some people believe that the Earth was created, believers believe that the Earth was created in 6 literal 24 days. 24-hour days. I know that you put that in your book, that you talk about that. What is can you tell us your opinion?
Yes, absolutely. I'm an old Earth creationist, and I believe God created the Earth, but it is not a few thousand years old. It's billions of years old, and I don't believe that Genesis was ever written or intended to give us a chronology all the way back to creation. I think the idea that shepherds living in a tent who were illiterate, the idea that they had some sort of special knowledge of the exact chronology back to creation is unsupported. They would never have thought that. They had no need of that. I mean, in our modern world, we want to know about the dates and the times and the chronology. But there's no evidence that people during that time did that or even asked those questions. And so
I did want to clarify, it wasn't Ken Ham who wrote the article. It was a man named Simon Turpin.
Okay.
On December 6, 2022. So it's a couple years old.
May I put something in that's related but not exactly on task?
Yeah.
So with James Webb, they've just recently kind of made a composite photo of a couple of the oldest. I don't know if I think it's galaxies, but it might be galactic clusters.
They say it's the oldest formed galaxies in regard to the Big Bang.
Right. Okay. So there's no way those galaxies could be formed the way they're formed and how well they're formed or whatever.
Yeah.
In the amount of time they would have had past the Big Bang, given how old they are, based on how far away they are, there's no way.
Well, and they just found a new black hole that they feel is the oldest black hole, and those take a long time to form. So,
well, there's also and because of that, people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and what is his name, Miko Kikuchi or whatever, they are saying that all the textbooks are going to have to be rewritten because now the web is, in my opinion, as we go on in the future, it's always going to change. I think that
I agree.
We're going to learn more and more and more.
Sorry, that was exciting news, and it's new to me, and I'm like, yee!
So let's talk about something that maybe Sarita could even jump in on this, Sarita. So what would you say what would be the threat of having an old Earth view to a person that is a young Earth creationist? Why do you think that they would be so diametrically opposed to this view?
Yeah, it's a good question because young Earth creationists, and I was one. I grew up like that. You really feel threatened because you go to a movie or like Jurassic Park, or you visit the Grand Canyon, or you go to school or go to college, and your view is assaulted everywhere you turn. And if you're a young Earth creationist, and so they get to feel very defensive.
Literal people that take the Bible literally as they see it. When you change ages and stuff, you're attacking their whole religion.
Yeah,
not just that thing you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. It's like my God didn't know how to write. You're telling me that my God didn't know how to communicate to people, is what you're saying. And it's unfortunate that we would take that kind of a stance. And I was that kind of a person too. I had that. I was a hyper literalist about everything, and I didn't change my view because I learned something from science necessarily, but I changed my view because I began to see that there was no reason that all of these people that were discussing these topics were just trying to lie or to hurt me or deceive me. Right. That wasn't what was going on. But I had a very, I guess I would say that I was very small-minded for a long time. I'm not saying that's true for everyone. I'm just saying that that was me. And so I would be threatened by that. I'm no longer threatened by that. I'm old Earth as well. But
for now, Rick, it's just bears for Rick.
Yes.
Rick is threatened by bears.
That's the only thing that scares me. That and Greg, I think our cat here in the studio.
I think I frustrated every pastor I ever had because I questioned everything.
Right.
Because I traveled a lot as a young kid and saw things, and then they would talk about dates, and then you go to church and they talk about other dates, and then I'd say, well, what about this and what about this? And until I was 20, I heard, have faith, have faith, have faith. And then after 20, I'm like, I'm out of this church and I'm going to go to somebody who's at least going to give me an answer, or I can find some answers, which brings me to your book. I loved your book and I hated your book. I loved your book because it has a lot of points and there's a lot of things in there that I questioned. What I didn't like about it is it made me do a lot of research. It made me look up a lot of things. I made a lot of notes on this, and I'm like, okay, there's a lot of stuff I
Ralph
don't know.
hates to read.
There's a lot of stuff I don't know, so it made me, and now it's left me with a lot more questions that I had when I started it.
Which is beautiful. I think that's how it always works, isn't it, Ralph?
Yeah, unfortunately for me.
And I think, and we're about to wrap up our time here, Dr. Olson. But so I want to tell our audience here. So your book is called "How Old Was Father Abraham? The Genesis, Lifespans, and Light of Archaeology." And thank you, Dr. Olson. You actually sent us a autographed copy to each one of us. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was very nice.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so people, this was put out by Trowel Press out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. You can go on and search Craig Olson. And the book, again, is How Old Was Father Abraham? The Genesis, Lifespans, and Light of Archaeology. And since this was a testimony, Sarita, this might take you, if you've never heard our podcast, then you're not going to know. This might come out of left field, but would you ask the final question we always ask every guest?
Sure. So, Dr. Olson, or Dr. Craig.
Yeah.
When you die as a believer, what happens next? Where do you go? What's next? It's not that's not exactly how Billy asks it, but it's close.
Yeah, what do you believe? To be
Where
specific.
do you believe? What do you believe happens when you die?
When you're absent from the body, you're present with the Lord.
That's what I said. I must be pretty smart. I answered like a PhD
Like a
would.
PhD would. That's
I only
wonderful.
have a bachelor's. Look at me go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you know, we asked the last question, and then all of a sudden, one of the most important questions that I wanted to ask you. So I'm sorry, we're not done yet. I do have one more question for you.
He lied. That's in the Bible.
In the book of Daniel and in the book of Revelation, you know that there are plenty of numbers that are used for prophecy, apocalyptic languages, and these numbers. So, in a lot of the studies that I've seen, like whenever Daniel describes the 70 weeks of years, and they determine that it's 490 years, and they use the Jewish calendar of 360 days. Some people will use those literally. They'll look to a specific dynasty, a Medo-Persian dynasty. They'll set a number. It'll land when the Messiah came. Are we to look at those numbers as literal? And then when you get to Revelation and you start to see all of this symbology, like, for instance, when he says there are 7 churches, and we know he actually calls out the 7 churches, but in the sense that he says a 1,000-year reign, are we to look at that as a literal number or symbolic? Do you see what I mean? And how do we determine both? You're looking at ages in Genesis. Have you looked into any of this in regard to like Daniel or the later apocalyptic languages?
Yeah, prophecy and apocalyptic, and there's a great book out that you probably know of, Plowshares and Pruning Hooks, Brent Sandy on this.
I've never heard of that book.
Oh, you have to read it. It's fantastic.
What would you say the title one more time?
It's Plowshares and Pruning Hooks is the title of the book.
Okay.
The author is Brent Sandy, Sandy.
Brent Sandy. Okay.
And you, look it up on Amazon. Make sure I've got the title right. I may have it incorrect. The interesting thing that I learned when I looked at that is that prophecy and apocalyptic, when looking to the future, nobody understood it until after the fact. Even prophecies, because in Scripture we have prophecies that are given, and then we see the fulfillment. And the fulfillment is often quite different from the prophecy. So the simplest one is Paul in the book of Acts is going to Jerusalem, and somebody, a prophet, gives a message and ties up Paul's hands with his own belt and says, "Thus, in this way, the owner of this belt will be tied up by the Romans or by the Sanhedrin." Now, Paul does go to Jerusalem. He does get arrested. But he's never tied up with his own belt, and it wasn't the Sanhedrin who arrested him; it was the Romans. So it didn't turn out exactly the way it was prophesied at all. So prophecy is very much more general and more picturesque and more big picture than it is specifics. And so it's an interesting, fascinating study when you look at and in Daniel too, you have. The book of Daniel, you have some prophecies that are prophesied and then fulfilled. And when you look at that, the answer that I got out of all of that was, you're not going to know prophecy until after it happens. And then you're going to look back and say, oh, that's what that meant. None of us, even the best of us, looking forward after a prophecy or an apocalyptic picture is given, looking forward, are not going to understand the fulfillment until afterwards. And then we look back and go, oh, you know what? That all fits.
Yeah, I've said here in this podcast many times, I've looked at Andy and I'm saying, man, these Jews were so good at prophecy, it's almost like they wrote it after it happened. When you look in history, you know what I mean? Like that's what it feels like they're looking back,
Well, and that's the view of some people of our the liberal scholars, is that, oh yeah, it was written afterwards because it's too accurate.
Well, isn't a history always written in the future?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's just a matter of how far.
It is. Well, I certainly appreciate you taking your time out and being on our podcast. It means a lot to me, and I know it means a lot to us here. And guys, go again. Like I said, do you have a website by any chance?
I do not.
Okay.
I don't have a website, but I do have a page on academia.edu. So you can look me up on academia.edu, and I have 2 or 3 articles there that summarize the book. You can get those for free and dig into my footnotes and print those out and take a look at that. And of course, you can get the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you guys again, if you go where you clicked on this podcast, if you look in the body of that paragraph, I will have a link to Dr. Olson's book so that you can purchase that book. And I will also put a link to that academia.edu where you can find Dr. Olson's work. So again, his book, How Old Was Father Abraham? The Genesis Lifespans and Light of Archaeology. Dr. Olson, thanks so much for being on the show.
That was fascinating.
Yeah, thanks. That was
Yes,
fun.
thank you.
Thank
so
you.
much. Appreciate it, guys. Thanks.
Absolutely. Well, take care.
You too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
He seems very cool and like that's fascinating.
Yeah, that was a fascinating. The book, like for me, it was difficult to read.
A little
but that's-
hard for you, yeah.
Well, yeah. I
Well,
mean,
how old is Abraham?
Huh?
I missed the whole. I'm sorry that I came in late.
He didn't say.
He didn't.
No, he didn't. But if we were to guess, I would say he's somewhere between 400 and 500 years old. Do you get the joke? Get the joke? The dude's really educated, so I highly honored him. Anyway, well, Rick, I'm sorry that you missed
Such a dud.
You're not a dud. You had to drive from Columbia, bro.
Yeah. Completely reasonable. frankly.
Rita, thanks for being here. Thanks for and
You know it.
that article by that guy from Answers in Genesis. Andy, Ralph,
Represent.
Cherry.
Rick.
Thanks for being here. We will talk to you guys again next time on the Burros of Berea. Peace out.
See ya.
Bye, y'all.
Hey guys, this is Rick from the Burros of Berea. Do you know how much blood, sweat, and tears it takes to make a podcast? None. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't cost a lot. And so if you guys don't mind, if anybody would like to give to help us with these episodes, it would be great. We'll put out even more content. And if you go to our Patreon page, just search for the Burros of Berea, you'll get extra notes, extra episodes, and it's pretty much free. $1 gets you a lot. Thanks, guys.